Lake Ellesmere, to the Maori, Waihora, or waters spread out. From earliest times it was a rich fishing ground. But in the 1860s, Ellesmere became the scene of a shipping venture that lasted 15 years, but is today all but forgotten. When Europeans first came to Canterbury, housing materials were scarce. Sod houses were evidence that by 1860, most of the bush was gone, and with it, building timber. But at Little River on the peninsula, there was found to be a forest with enough timber to supply much of Canterbury for years. The bush at Little River was thick and luxuriant. It was mainly totara, but there was black and white pine as well. One early resident said it was indescribably beautiful, with a countless number of wonderful native birds that sang unceasingly. Beauty and birds weren't going to stand in the way of William White, William Britton and William Coop, who set about to build what came to be known as Coop's Mill at Little River in 1864. The road to Christchurch was bad and the land swampy. A tramway to Christchurch was planned, but in the meantime the mill owners devised an extraordinary scheme to get the timber out. From Little River, a tram line took sawn timber to Lake Forsyth. It was floated down the lake on punts or barges. At the foot of Lake Forsyth, the timber was taken off the barge. It was transferred to a tramway for an overland journey to Lake Ellesmere, where another barge was waiting. The mill owners chose to take the timber across the 25-kilometre stretch of Lake Ellesmere to the western side to a place they called the Timber Yard, a name it has to this day. The often choppy waters of Lake Ellesmere were traversed by a small fleet of steam-powered and paddle-driven punts. One was called Swamp Hen, another Pukaki. Quite amazingly, no photographs have survived of any of the boats.
We know from the Swamp Hen description that it was drew 32 inches and could make 8 knots, carrying 13,000 superficial feet of timber. They carried a crew of 3, a captain, a fireman and a rouseabout. But apart from that, we can only conjecture.
Murray Patterson has spent his life at Lakeside. He's writing the history of the timber trade. Murray, it's curious, isn't it, that there are no photographs to show us what these boats look like, isn't it?
Yes, one would have thought with such an extensive timber trade that went on between 1864, as we know, and sometime after 1874, and according to the MacDonald biographies, there were a regular fleet of small steamers out here on Lake Ellesmere during that timber trade, that somebody would have photographed such an interesting sight.
The timber from Little River built hundreds of houses in the Leaston Southbridge area and further afield, including Christchurch. The biggest order the Little River Mill ever had was for timber for the first Rakaya Bridge, which was started in 1869. The Ellesmere trade died sometime in the late 1870s or early 80s as the forest was destroyed, and the railway came to Little River in 1886. The Lakeside Timber Yard wound down. Some of its people stayed on. Les Hance is the grandson of a fireman on the paddle ship Pukaki.
What we called the tram lines, I don't know why we called them tram lines, but they came up over here onto the shore out of the water, and that was where they brought the punts. They unloaded the punts offshore and brought the timber ashore on these trolleys on the tram lines. The tram lines and the wheels disappeared overnight, and no one seems to know where they went or who got them. I don't know.
Almost all evidence of the timber trade has now vanished. For 100 years, the Pukaki's boiler lay under the pine trees at the timber yard, but it recently disappeared, breaking one of the final links with this almost forgotten venture. Perhaps the only surviving relic of the paddle boats is this derelict pigsty at Lakeside. These timbers once formed the hull of the ship Pukaki, and they've been here for more than 100 years.